Somebody has to be the favorite, the one that everybody wants to see. Somebody has to be better than the rest. Somebody has to be so good that they're the best. Somebody has to be the favorite. Somebody has to be me. We all have a favorite character in Thomas and Friends. Whether we identify with them with personal reasons or just love their scenes in the show, their iconic moments, there's a character that stands in the hearts of many children and young adults and man-children across the Thomas fandom. And James just so happens to be mine, and I make it no secret that he is. So why is James my favorite? Today we're going to take a look at the iceberg. The iceberg of why somebody has to be the favorite, and my favorite is James. In order to understand why James is my favorite, we have to take a deep dive into several categories. So let's go deep into the mind of the creator to find out why James is the favorite. I mean, a big reason why James is my favorite character is his character. He's got one of the most complex personalities of any character on the show. He's funny, he's boisterous, he's stubborn, he's exciting, he's vain, he's insecure. There's so many different aspects to James's character as a character, right? Let's start with the outer appearance, right? For James, he can be stubborn and arrogant and vain, but he's very prideful of himself, and a lot of characters take pride in other things. James is one of the few characters that truly takes pride in himself and himself only. Like, Gordon's proud of himself too, but it's mainly because of his background and his lineage. James takes pride in simply because he's him, in his eyes. James is, arrogant about it, obviously, and he brags, and he tries to, in a way, peacock himself, which, a peacock is the bird with the feathers at the back, they flare it up, and he tries to make himself feel like he's bigger than he actually is. He tries to put himself on stages that are bigger than, an engine like him is. He's a generic goods engine from the LMS with not a ton of, interesting aspects to him. He doesn't have, the background or the legacy that a character like Gordon has, or even Duck has with the Great Western. So, I think that's what makes James's outward side interesting, that he tries to play himself up so much. But I think that contrasts with his insecurity. James likes being his color because I think it gives him importance. And something I did when I was doing research for my movie Red years ago, I found out from the railway that James is from, I can't find the article, so I don't know how accurate it is, but engines that were painted red, were signifying engines of, express passengers and at higher status than engines that were painted black or gray, which were usually goods engines or shunters. And I think James having an attachment to that color, seeing it as regal and having him stand out amongst the cast, is something that makes it interesting for his character. That he craves the attention, he craves the spotlight, so much so that the idea of losing it would feel like losing himself and losing any self-worth or even importance. I think another aspect of James to look at is you have to look at his determination/stubbornness. When James has set his mind on something, he's going to do it, right? He's not lazy. He picks and chooses what he wants to do, but he's not lazy. He's not afraid of hard work. He just wants the hard work to be something glamorous. But when he's focused and determined and actually is trying to do the right thing, that's when James is at his best. Troublesome Trucks from Season 1 is a great example of James's stubbornness yet determination. As here in this episode, James wants to pull this train to prove himself, maybe for the outside goal of keeping his red paint, but proving to himself that he's actually capable. I mean, at this point, he's crashed on his first day, he ruined the Fat Controller's top hat, he overran a platform, broken the brake pipe in the coach, and messed with a passenger's bootlace and all that stuff. It was not a great series of events for a character on his first few days. This was something he had to almost prove to himself that he belonged. much less keeping his red paint. He does a very good job, and I think that's a fun aspect of his personality. So there's many layers to James. There's his light-hearted, vain side, there's the insecure, quiet side, and then there's the stubborn, determined side. He's highly opinionated. He always wants to have his voice heard. You know, he's not the largest engine of the sheds, he's not the smallest, but he wants to be part of the crowd. He tries to surround himself with others like Gordon and Henry to try to make himself feel bigger, and when he's around others like Thomas and Percy, he tries to make himself feel, you know, like he's better than the other two. But we'll get into that detail in the next section. You know, what I think about relationships with James and the other characters, I think he's got a lot of unique ones, and they're all pretty different. You know, Thomas and Henry are kind of sibling relationships, but for different things. It's because Thomas and James kind of lived out similar lives. Their first two books are very similar. And then, you know, you go to Henry, it's kind of like he's always vying for attention from Gordon. It's kind of like, okay, which one of the two is going to be second in command? With Gordon, it's a very interesting relationship. It's almost like a older brother, pseudo father figure type relationship where Gordon feels like he takes ownership of James, and sometimes they're on the same level, like when they're trying to pick on somebody, and other times, you know, they're on different levels because, you know, they're just trying to, you know, Gordon's trying to separate himself. But then you have Edward, right? And Edward is a very unique character to James. In a weird way, he's a foil to James. And he's this older, wiser character that James simply just doesn't care about. But then he complains all the time, and whereas everyone tells James to just shut up and go about his business and handle it, Edward listens a lot of the time. And I think that means something to James. You know, James and Percy, James in this way, it kind of reminds me of like a Steve and Dustin from Stranger Things type relationship where James is big brother, kind of a mentor in a way to Percy. James and Toby, kind of the inverse of James and Edward. Toby just doesn't care that much about James. James just kind of like, Toby's someone I can make myself look better than, and Toby's just like, whatever, James, you're in your own world. And, you know, the relationships just go further and further, and I think he's such a fun, versatile character to work with, and I think that's why so many people use him in their series in so many different ways. The interesting thing about James is he also stands out as a character. And something I noticed is while filming JBS How It Should Be and the process of going through that, there was a scene that was shot by my friend, Roman, where the engines are at Tidmouth Sheds, and it's the first time we've seen James gone in the movie. Like, this is the first time they're figuring it out. And when I was watching it the first time in one of the final run-throughs, I was like, the shed looks so different. One character's missing and it looks so different. Because everyone else in the Steam team is usually like blue or green, and even Emily's green is a darker green, but it fits. It's all blues and greens, and then you have James, who's the one red engine that just stands out and pops off the screen. And he's done that for so many years. He was the only red engine in the series for several years. And even when the Skarloey Railway engines appeared, because they're smaller, James took up the screen. He still stands out. He pops out in shots. It's hard not to miss him. You know, you hear people mistake, Gordon and Thomas and Edward together, and they'll mistake Percy and Henry. But no one ever mistakes James, because he's one of the few red characters in the show, and he stands out with his bright red coat. An interesting thing about James that I realize is, as we talk about how iconic he is as a character, he is the second most popular character in the series, and I want to quickly explain what I mean by that. So I discovered this in around 2017, and I'm not sure if it's been pointed out or not, but the order of the characters in the engine roll call, the original one at least, Thomas, James, Percy, Gordon, Emily, Henry, Edward, and Toby, is in order of popularity, which is actually kind of interesting. And here's how I deducted this. So there was an article in 2017 that came out that mentioned the Steam team needed to change, and they were going to bring in new characters, and that the Steam team needed to be more diverse because there's 6 boys and 1 girl. I was like, wait a second, that equals 7. but there's 2, there's 4, there's 6, there's 8. That's, the math ain't mathing. What's going on here? Oh, I know why. They discounted Toby, who didn't stay at the sheds and was appearing less and less in the show at this time. So it made sense, like, Toby was the one that got the cut. So then it came down to, alright, who are the next 2 characters they got rid of? Henry and Edward, who, surprisingly, are the next 2 characters in the song. Shocker. And then you go a little bit deeper. The characters that made it to Bubba, Big World, Big Adventures, Thomas, James, Percy, first 3 characters in the song, all had starring roles or shared starring roles in Thomas films. The next character to have any sort of starring role to an extent is Gordon in The Great Race. Emily was the 5th. So they cut the line off at Emily, added Nia and Rebecca, and that's how you get it. And JBS stars Thomas and James because they were the 2 most popular characters in the franchise. I know, mind-blowing, isn't it? So, the world really clearly loves James. Obviously, Thomas is number 1 in popularity because he is literally number 1, and also he's the main character of the show. But James is number 5, and he quickly rose to the ranks of stardom, and I think it's because he's iconic that he stands out. He's fun, he's memorable. That's why he's someone that has really risen towards the top of the series. I mean, the amount of stories that people have with James is just simply incredible. So many great quotes, so many great lines. He's a fun character, and I mentioned his versatility, but he's just so fun to listen to. Just so many great episodes. I mean, in my top 10 alone, you know, you had several episodes that made it. And, you know, my favorite episode, Thomas Percy, Old Slow Coach, he's not the main character, but he certainly steals the show. He's not the main character, but he certainly steals the show. You have characters like, you have episodes like Old Iron and James Goes Buzz, and even James Learns the Lesson, you know. And that's what kind of makes him a fun character to listen to, a fun character to listen to talk, and he just always steals the show on screen. It could be for a simple line, but he always has a grand entrance. He's one of the most consistent characters in the show. You know, everyone loves, you know, in season 5, his effeminate voice that Alec Baldwin gives him, and it just stands out in such a way. It's just, I feel like James is probably one of the most quotable characters in the show. Like, I'm sure I could start off any James quote with, and anyone in the fandom could finish it off in pretty much any era. And I think that's just why he's one of the best characters. You know, I see a lot of myself in James. You know, it's really hard to put into words. I mean, for one thing, we have similar first names. You know, obviously share 3 of the first 5 letters. I know that's a petty reason, but, you know, it's just something interesting. And it's kind of, to me, obviously my favorite color is red. I'm wearing it right now. But, you know, the idea is, I still can't decide if my favorite color is red because of James, or if James happens to just be my favorite color, but, you know, it's just a fun thing to look at. And I think there are similar parts of our personalities. I don't think I'm 100% James. There are other characters that I think I definitely fit the mold for a little bit better, but, you know, James is one of those characters, in all honesty, that, looking back at him, he's just kind of he's a riot, you know. He has his moments of trying to prove others right. He gets very determined, almost to levels of stubbornness, and I feel like I can express some of that myself. And James is very opinionated. He may not have the best opinions, but he's going to have opinions, and you're going to hear about them. And it's interesting whenever that happens. But I would say that those are things that we share, you know, the idea of, like, being stubborn yet determined while also having this senseless zeal and passion and all these things just running together, and you have these ideas of, like, you have your ideas and you have your thoughts and you just want to share them with the world, and they may not always be the best thoughts, but they're thoughts, and, you know, sometimes you just want to stage the show, you want to be a performer, you want to be in the spotlight, and that's just who James is. Another reason why I like James is because he loves jazz. I always loved his theme, and I love the variations it comes in. You have the bouncier, swingy version of his theme that plays a lot more in Season 1, but as James matures, his theme becomes less jazzy and more less spontaneous, really. It becomes more relaxed and refined when he's focused and trying to do the right thing. And I think it represents his maturity throughout the series. James does improve to an extent, and that's why his theme kind of reflects upon it. When James is extremely boisterous or happy, his theme is usually very loud and showy, but when he's supposed to be focused on his work, his theme is more determined and in line and focused and not very swingy jazzy. So I think that's a really cool idea and motif, especially in the early years that they did with James. You know, when I think back to my childhood with James and, other characters and how I got them and when was the day that I picked James to be my favorite, I couldn't name a specific one, but I could name a day that it may have been. And I was like 4 or 5 years old. I was sitting in front of the TV, in fact, this TV, watching Races, Rescues, and Runaways. And, in the middle of it, I believe it was Hard Lori. My mom comes in, she tells me, okay, you gotta stop watching the tape now. I want you to do some things. So like every little kid does, you kind of groan and roll your eyes, but you're like, whatever, we'll do it. She hands me a piece of paper, and on this piece of paper, there's like a note, and it has like specific instructions she wants me to follow. And it's like, alright, I follow around, and I realize I'm on a scavenger hunt. So I'm going around the house, solving clues and whatnot, and eventually, I noticed that on each scavenger hunt clue there's a letter, and the letter spells out a word, and the word is the thing that I had to find, and, well, I go to the final place, I find the final clue, I get the item, and the words all spell out James, and I got my first wooden rail of James that day. I remember how I got a lot of my first items, but that story always stuck out to me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and this was a very different style. I tried to do it as like a documentary type thing and very editorial, something that I'm not used to doing, but this will be kind of fun to just kind of deep dive why James is my favorite character. So, with that, this is Train King James celebrating 10 years. I hope all of you enjoyed.